Welcome, everybody. We are so delighted as the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts to welcome you to this lecture by a dear friend and colleague and one of my university professors, Dr. Cynthia Finlayson. I've got a little bio that I will read really quickly. Dr. Cynthia Finlayson received her MA in Near Eastern Anthropology and Museum Studies from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., with museum training at the Smithsonian Institution, and her doctorate in Classical Art History and Archaeology with a minor in Islamic Art History from the University of Iowa. She has been excavating and working in the Near East since 1974 and currently directs 2 archaeology projects at Apamea and Palmyra, Syria, as well as a museum project at the Azem Palace in Damascus. And she has been appointed co-director of the Ad-Deir Plateau Project in Petra, Jordan. She teaches classical and Islamic archaeology as well as museum studies for the Anthropology department at Brigham Young University. On a personal note, I just wanted to say that I have been very eager to have Dr. Finlayson come join us and tell us about the Azem Palace and her work there, because I was able to go there with her. I think it was in 2010. It's like a lifetime ago, and that introduced me to the marvelous geometry patterns that many of you have been learning alongside me in these online classes over the last 2 or so years. That kind of generosity in bringing me along on that trip is very indicative of her generosity towards her students. She's very dedicated in not just introducing to the students to the facts, but giving them sort of a deeper awareness of the cultural context and just sharing her love for the culture and the people and these beautiful places. So without further ado, let me turn the time over to Dr. Cynthia Finlayson. And do put any questions in the chat that emerged throughout the lecture. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you. Let me get up to the presentation here, I hope. I hope everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. We're, of course, not working in Syria right now because of the ongoing war over there. And I'm excited, though. This has just made me miss Damascus and Syria so much more to go back over some of this information. So this was part of a project that was jointly done with the Syrian Department of Antiquities and a mentored project. So, we had U.S. State Department funding for it. So it was an ongoing 5-6 year project at the Azem Palace to try to help update their exhibitions and educational programs. So what I'm going to do today, hopefully, is I'm going to show you a few slides because I imagine some of you already know with relation to Islamic beliefs, Muslim beliefs, but I want to try to get everybody on board and show you a few slides about some major themes within this palace. And then I'm going to show you, I hope, if the tech works, a short film on the Azem Palace that we did for the Azem Palace. This will be the English version. It was a student mentored project. And so one of my former students, Kristen South, is going to be the moderator because she looks more Syrian than I do. And this is a film that was going to be translated into Arabic for the palace itself to use as their introductory film. And then we can open up for all kinds of questions that you guys would like to ask. I just want to talk about some themes within the palace itself. The palace was built in 1749, and it was built by the pasha, Asad al-Azam, and used subsequently by his family until it passed over to first the French and then the Syrian government. And I want to just point out a few things so you can look for these in the film and kind of notice them. The film will give you some history, more history than I'm going to give you right now for the palace. First of all, the palace has this beautiful tricolor ablak that they're using in the stone walls here. And this is not necessarily an Ottoman style, but it comes from an earlier Mamluk style to use these three colors. And it's used traditionally in Syria because they do have the stone resources for this. So the white is local limestone. The sort of orangish earth red can often be either sandstone or jasper, depending on the location. And the black is basalt that's coming from the Haran, from southern Syria. So you'll see it throughout the palace. So it's an older style, and it may have been influenced. Some scholars think there was a former Mamluk palace underneath this. It's a really prime location as far as real estate in Damascus. It's close to the Barda River, it's close to the citadel. And so it's a very kind of power location within the city itself. There was an older Mamluk palace called the Ablak Palace of Baybars. It's not extant anymore, but we do have some written accounts of it that may have influenced this style for the Azem Palace. So be looking for that. And this is the Salamlik courtyard in the rain, actually. You'll notice the big fountain in the center. The other theme relates to every Muslim is encouraged and required to try to live a spiritual enough life that they prepare themselves to hopefully be accepted in paradise in the afterlife. But along with that is the obligation to try to create a spiritual and physical paradise within their home and for their community. And of course, depending on your economic resources, the Azems at the time, because Asad al-Assam was pasha, the Ottoman governor in Damascus, he had just really incredible resources at his disposal to do this. I'm showing you the gardens in the Haramlik. So the idea is to create a paradise on earth with flowing water and green gardens. I don't have a good shot here of the Yawan, the big, huge Persian style archway that catches wind at one end of the gardens itself. You can sit in the evenings in the summer, and it's really cooling. But Majnuni, the plant that's a crazy plant because it grows all over the place on the left, beautiful, beautiful gardens, and often planted with plants and trees that were scented. So jasmine and lemon and all kinds of things that in the cooling water that you'd hear the flowing water. So this is kind of the Damascus version of the Alhambra in Spain, though a much smaller palace. Palace was 6,400 square meters or so. The other thing to look back for, as I mentioned, is this flowing water theme related to paradise. My favorite fountain in the Azem Palace, and we discovered this when we removed an older stage that had been put in the courtyard in the Salamlik. This is the fountain that's a game. And the idea is to have two opponents that put a flower petal, preferably a scented one like a rose or a flower blossom, on opposite sides of this maze, and then race with the water on to see whose flower gets to the center of the maze first, but also perfume the area at the same time. So this is a really fun example. There are fountains throughout the palace. Every bedroom complex has a fountain, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And you can notice the mosaics also, and the mosaic patterns. The other thing that the palace is famous for is ajami, the carved and painted and mother of pearl inserted, just elaborate ceilings. They also were using this to decorate walls and cupboards and other things. But this is what you would look at in the morning when you woke up from your bedroom bed. And so we'll talk about that, the bedroom complexes, in just a moment too. Oftentimes they're using muqarnas, dripping muqarnas and wood carvings on the side. And you can see the archway in the room with the mosaics also. And just a close-up of the ajami with inlaid mother of pearl. This is art craft that was still practiced in Damascus before the Civil War started in 2011. Before that time, we had a list of all the craftsmen and what they did in the old city, but have not been able to keep track during the war if some of these crafts are still being practiced or we're losing a lot culturally because of the war. Intarsia, also Damascus, is extremely famous for its inlaid intarsia, using geometry of all different kinds. Also in the lower little desk on the lower right-hand side, the use of dripping muqarnas along the bottom side of the furniture. Damascus was famous for its, along the Barda River, its walnut trees that were used for this type of furniture, and also being able to import the mother of pearl for different types of intarsia work. So the palace has one of the most wonderful collections of this, and you'll see it in all different types of forms. And then, of course, the mosaics. And this is Lisa's favorite thing. So she's going to do a workshop, I guess, on Monday on some of the mosaic forms at the Azem Palace. So I want to plug that as something you should follow up with. Just beautiful, beautiful mosaics in different styles. A lot of these are paste mosaics. Some are actual stone mosaics within the palace itself. So be looking for those in the decoration. The mosaics, also the mosaic patterns and geometric patterns are also apparent in the floors. This is the hammam, or the bath, in the major bath in the Azem Palace. So they were wealthy enough to have their own. Around the corner from this palace and down the street is actually an ancient Roman bath that's still being used as a Turkish bath today. And then just the Damascus also had a ceramic tile industry, very much influenced by ceramics coming in that were fashionable for bridal gifts, coming in from Japan and from China at the time. So that just, I wanted you just to be aware of some of the things as we look at the film. We're just talking about architecture today and building layout. The other amazing things that the Azem Palace has that we don't have time to talk about today is the textile collection. Damascus was famous and still is famous for its hand-loomed silk brocades. There's an incredible jewelry collection, ceramics, the embroidery traditions of women within the Damascus region. And Damascus at this time was not just the city of Damascus. It was the province of Damascus, which went all the way to the gates of Jerusalem. So this was a huge area. And then its manuscript collection. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things with the mosaics. Damascus had 5 to 6 religious universities that were functioning in the Ottoman period, but also large groups of Sufi mystical groups that were in Damascus. And so the concepts of sacred geometry and how that was used within Sufism are really interesting to explore. So just some things to take a look at. If you're interested in walking through that door I just showed you and investigating some of these things, I'd recommend a couple of books. Keenan's book on Damascus and the Hidden Treasures, and the Arts and Crafts of Syria. That is, let's see, I think it's Crater that published this one. There's a bibliography that I have that I'm willing to send on to the Prince's School that you might be interested in having. I'll let Lisa have that. Okay, let me get out of this format and try to pull up for you the video.
Since before the dawn of written history, Greater Syria has been a mother of the civilized world. Syria's fertile lands encouraged the birth of settled agriculture. The world's first alphabet emerged from Syria's busy markets. Poised between Asia and Europe, between traditional nomadic life and modernity, Syria has always brought people together. Farmers, nomads, and merchants have been doing business in the markets of Damascus for 10,000 years without a break, longer than anywhere else in the world. Syria's place at the crossroads of the world has also sentenced its people to invasions by ambitious neighbors. Each wave of invasion has left its mark on Syrian society, culture, and history. The streets of Damascus have echoed with the footsteps of armies from Babylon and Assyria, Alexander's Greece and the legions of Rome, European crusaders and the heirs of the Muslim conquest. 1,000 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the loudest footsteps in Damascus belonged to the Ottoman Turks. From their capital at Istanbul, the Ottomans controlled a massive Muslim empire. It stretched from the Persian Gulf in the east to the gates of Vienna in the west. In 1743, their attention turned to the wealthy and strategic city of Damascus.
The Ottomans needed to appoint a new governor for Damascus, which was an extraordinarily valuable city. Not only was it one of the world's greatest markets, but it was also the gateway to Arabia, the birthplace of Islam. The Ottomans needed someone who was strong enough to control both Bedouin raiders and wealthy, ambitious merchants, but not strong enough to threaten the Ottomans themselves. Most officials lasted less than 2 years.
The governor's biggest responsibility was organizing the Hajj. Every year, Muslims from all over Europe and Asia gathered in Damascus for the final leg of their pilgrimage to Mecca, Islam's holiest city. The governor of Damascus was responsible for the health and safety of these pilgrims through some of the most dangerous and forbidding territory of the Middle East. The man the Ottomans finally appointed to be their new governor was Azem Pasha, a member of the prominent Al-Azem family.
The Azems were the first Syrian family that managed to stay in power under the Ottomans for any length of time. They were so good at keeping order in Syria that the Ottomans couldn't afford to dismiss them, and Asad Pasha al-Azem was the best of the lot. His family sent the young man out to learn everything he could about the province. They made him mayor of Hama, and once he'd figured that out, they sent him to Tripoli. They made him a senior official for the Hajj so he could get experience negotiating with the Bedouin, who had to be paid off so they wouldn't attack the caravan. No Syrian governor had ever been as well prepared for his job as Asad Pasha, and when he came to power, he made the most of it. As governor, he introduced a new level of stability, prosperity, and civic pride to Damascus. He built a huge new caravanserai and other public facilities.
Despite all of his success, Asad Pasha knew he had to walk a fine line. If he was too good at his job, the Ottoman Sultan might feel threatened. Asad Pasha had already been governor longer than anyone else. It was only a matter of time until the Sultan brought in a younger man to replace him. And in 18th century Damascus, there was no such thing as a peaceful retirement. Asad Pasha decided he was going to do everything he could to protect what was his.
He'd always been a great builder. As far back as Hama, when he was just starting out, Asad Pasha al-Azem had restored mosques and built markets and other public buildings. Now he decided to do the same for himself and his family.
He dreamed of a palace whose walls were like a fortress, thick and strong enough to keep his children safe. He dreamed of comfortable, luxurious rooms overlooking fragrant gardens and sparkling fountains. He dreamed of a safe haven, a paradise for the people he loved. And then he built it. They say that for 3 years, every carpenter and stonemason in Damascus labored to build Azem Palace. 800 men scoured greater Syria for the finest marble, basalt, and jasper, uprooting Roman columns from Basra and mosaic floors from Banyas. More than 1,000 precious trees were sacrificed for its wooden paneling and ornate Ajami ceilings. Engineers diverted the waters of the Barada River for the palace garden and fountains. The finished palace was organized into 4 functional areas, each built around its own fountains and courtyards. The first, the Salamlik, was used to entertain the Pasha's political and business associates.
The Salamlik is self-contained with its own entrance and courtyard. Its walls and sharp corners are designed to screen off the rest of the palace grounds. This was to preserve the modesty, privacy, and security of the family's women and children.
The next section of the palace is the Khadamlik, or servants' quarters.
The idea was to remove the service area from the rest of the house. You had the stables, the kitchens, and the servants' quarters, the Khadamlik with its own courtyard and fountain. Unfortunately, this is one part of the palace that visitors will have to imagine for themselves, since it hasn't been restored yet.
The Haramlik was the largest and most lavish of the palace's 4 zones. This was the domain of the family, and a place for the pasha to temporarily escape the political turmoil of Ottoman Damascus. From the secure environment of the Haramlik, the women of the Azem family supervised the palace's large staff, oversaw the education of the children, provided emotional and advisory support for their husbands and family members, entertained private guests, and sometimes managed their own businesses and properties. Each major family member had their own private suite, with their own bedroom and separate reception room.
Hospitality was a sacred duty in the Near East. The status, reputation, and refinement of a family were measured by their treatment of the guests in their home.
Reception rooms offered guests the best of everything: fine furniture inlaid with mother-of-pearl, luxuriant textiles, imported glassware and china, entertainment, and fountains to cool and refresh the air. The museum has converted part of the Haramlik to displays representing aspects of public life in Damascus, like this schoolroom and men's cafe. You'll also find displays of traditional Syrian arts and crafts. The Haramlik's courtyards were an important part of its design. Their fountains and great iwans, reception areas open to the out-of-doors on one side, caught the wind, cooling the palace during the heat of the summer. Breezes wafted the scent of the citrus, jasmine, and roses from the gardens throughout the palace compound.
The flowing water and green plants also served a spiritual purpose. Muslims associate gardens, the color green, and water with paradise, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and the beautiful words of the Quran. Each inspires us to use the material gifts of this world to create a paradise here and now, as well as in the hereafter.
The fourth and final area of the palace was the hammam, or bath. Bathing, usually in public bathhouses, had been an important part of Syrian culture since Roman times. A private hammam was an almost unheard of luxury. A labyrinth of small rooms allowed heat and steam to remain in the bath, as well as providing privacy for the bathers. The hammam still hosts a complete furnace system, as well as the pierced light wells typical of the Ottoman era.
People used the hammam as a place to relax and socialize. Men and boys would go at one time and women and children at another. An attendant would scrub you with hot water, then you'd steam for a while. Then they'd wrap you in thick cotton towels and serve you iced or hot drinks while you chatted with your friends. The baths themselves were quite beautiful, with floors inlaid with colored marble. A family could rent their community hammam before a wedding or other special occasion. The women of the bride's family would invite the women of the groom's family for a special bath to prepare for the big day. They'd have treats and play games and visit together. Guests would be given flower petals and they'd race them through the labyrinth, a party game that scented the air.
In such carefully ordered and beautiful spaces, the soul could attempt to transcend an earthly world of strife, hardship, and human loss. But any such transcendence was sure to be fleeting in 18th century Damascus. After almost 500 years in power, the Ottoman Empire was threatened from without by European merchants and their guns, and from within by its own inefficiency and corruption. With food in short supply, desperate Bedouin led raids on villages and caravan routes. Wealthy merchants used the crisis as an excuse to force prices even higher. When Asad Pasha tried to intervene to save his starving people, the merchants turned on him. By 1757, wealthy enemies of the Azem family had convinced the Ottoman Sultan that Asad Pasha was plotting against him. Just as he had feared, Asad Pasha found himself replaced by the Sultan's brother-in-law, a man who knew nothing of Syria, the practicalities of desert travel, or negotiating with Bedouin tribesmen. The new governor's inexperience quickly led to disaster. That very year, Bedouin clans attacked the Hajj caravan. 20,000 pilgrims, including the Sultan's own sister, died before they could be rescued from the unforgiving desert.
Of course, the Pasha's enemies immediately accused him of masterminding the attack to discredit his replacement, although historians haven't found any evidence that that's what really happened.
In the spring of 1758, Asad Pasha received the summons he'd been dreading. The Sultan called him to a formal inquiry in Istanbul. Reluctantly, Asad Pasha put his affairs in order, kissed his family goodbye, and set off for Istanbul. more than 1,000 kilometers away. En route, he stopped to refresh himself at a public hammam in Ankara. He had no idea that one of the Sultan's agents was watching. Before he realized what was happening, Asad Pasha felt an iron grip around his neck. The world turned black.
A few days later, a gift arrived at the Sultan's court in Istanbul. When the wrappings fell away, there was Asad Pasha's head.
It's said that it took 6 whole months for the Sultan's men to strip the last of the dead governor's wealth from the recesses and hiding places of the Azem Palace.
But they didn't get everything. When the smoke had cleared, the family had not only survived, but managed to hang on to a good part of their wealth. In fact, by 1771, less than 15 years later, the Ottomans appointed Asad Pasha's nephew the new governor of Damascus. So Asad Pasha managed to protect his treasures after all.
Today, the treasures guarded by Asad Pasha's palace include the most extensive collection of Ottoman-era costumes, textiles, jewelry, and artifacts in all of Greater Syria. As you wander through the museum, we hope you feel, as we do, that Asad Pasha al-Azem's dream of creating a safe and beautiful retreat from the world did come true, though not in the way he expected, and that his legacy of encouraging the artistic and cultural heritage of Damascus and Syria lives on within these walls.
You're now open for questions.
Yes.
I was wondering, first of all, if you could speak a little bit about the museum project there. What did your team do, and how are you trying to make the Azem Palace more accessible to local people?
Oh, okay, great. This was a project that I was requested to do by the Syrian Department of Antiquities in Damascus. And we were really assigned to go in and find out anything that we could do to improve the conservation of the collections. So we did a conservation assessment to also try to see what we could do to update the exhibits, because they hadn't been changed since probably the late 1940s, early 1950s, to provide exhibition texts in both Arabic and English. And at that point, there was no term in Syrian Arabic for museum education. So one of the things we did was there was no concept of providing educational materials for children. We did an audience assessment to figure out how the museum was being used, and interestingly, it is visited more by local people than even the National Museum, the Archaeological Museum, which was much larger in Damascus. And it seems, for all the challenges that the Syrian population had been asked to engage with since 1946 and the independence of Syria from France, and then modernization, globalization, the Azem Palace seemed to be a place where families and individuals would come just to kind of get back in touch with their roots. But there were lots of challenges with trying to provide education means to do this. One of the things we did put in were we chose 2 of the children's that we knew that had grown up within the Azem family and used them as kind of characters within educational panels for children within the museum that had not been done before. We produced 2 catalogs for the museum. We went in the audience survey. We discovered that the museum was being used quite often by families. It was a family purposed museum. And therefore, we wanted to develop catalogs that would connect the new generation with the generation that had produced and was still producing these crafts that were being lost in Syria. but also to connect them with the older members and their family. So a lot of the activities, because in museums in Syria, children were not allowed to have pens or pencils to come to a museum. So we had to be really creative with finding things that they could do, both at the museum, but then to take this workbook home and have activities that would involve the whole family, both at home and coming back to visit the museum. Teachers' packets that teachers were not prepared. They would just take a day off from class and run 60 students wild through the museum without any knowledge or activities or anything that was, related to the collection. So providing materials that they could work with. And then we brought textile conservator experts in from the Textile Museum, then in Washington, D.C. It's been subsequently, that textile museum has been absorbed into George Washington University, but we brought conservators in to do training for the staff at the Azem Palace to try to improve conservation levels. So it was quite an extensive project, and we were towards the end of it when the war started, but there was still lots that we could have been doing. So Mesa Ibrahim, who's the current director, previous director, and now current director again, we brought her and 5 of the young professionals to both Washington, D.C. and then on for a semester training at our university. And we brought Amr al-Azam over to teach at our university, who is one of the descendants of the original Azem family. And he taught at BYU for a while, and now he's teaching in Ohio. So that's kind of a quick summation of what was going on.
That's great. So we have a question. Are there any plans to go back to either the Azem Palace or any other places in Syria when things settle down?
I would love to go back. I just don't know if that will happen in my lifetime, given what's happening in Syria right now. Syria is schismed into 5 or 6 different groups at the moment. We were working in Palmyra and Apamea also, archaeologically, at the same time we were doing this project. And the Russians are in Palmyra right now. ISIL is still active in the desert outside of Palmyra. There still is a lot of not a stable situation to try to bring teams in to do much of anything at the moment. I wish that were not the case. I wish this would settle down. The people of Syria don't deserve this kind of chaos. They deserve much better. They're wonderful, wonderful people and very hospitable. And I miss them. I miss the country a lot.
We have multiple people have asked if the palace and the collections have been affected in any way by the war, to your knowledge.
So far, Mesa has been able to keep things together. I have not had any reports on things being harmed or destroyed. Hopefully there will be no bombing into the old inner city. Damascus, as the movie mentioned, is the longest continuously inhabited city in the world that we know of. It's Jericho, as old as it was interrupted. There were times where there wasn't any population. Damascus still has its old Roman walls that surround the old city. And hopefully there will be no bombing there, because that would, fires in those areas because of the small alleyways, wooden balconies, wooden homes that still have wooden elements to them, would just be disastrous. So as far as I know, nothing has been harmed. The challenge is that nothing has been improved conservation-wise for the collections since the war that I'm aware of. And there was just so much that could have been worked on.
Mm-hmm. We had a number of questions over the course of the geometry sessions about the craft processes that it takes to make those roundels. Have you seen, are there still those stone paste workers?
No, they don't exist anymore. Yeah, as far as I know, when we went through the old city shop by shop, and tried to make a list of the crafts that were still happening. That was one craft that had not survived. So I can't give you too much information about that, unfortunately. And that's, as you know, is the big challenge right now everywhere, is trying to, with globalization and modernization, is to try to keep these crafts alive. And part of that is still having craftsmen that can do this, these different crafts. So for major mosques that have huge mosaic programs, it's hard to still have craftsmen that can do that quality of work.
So a follow-up on that. So which ones have stayed alive?
This is before 2011, when we had to get out of Syria. Intarsia was still being done. However, there was not when we went to the different shops, we often would film some of the craftsmen, and we had an Intarsia craftsman that the Azem Palace used to repair antiquities. And he was in his 60s at that time. So that would be in 2011. And we would film them and interview them. And he started to cry. And we asked, what's going on? What's the matter? He says, the young people were not interested anymore in the traditional crafts, and he's having to have Americans come do the interviews, which he thought was very ironic, because we're dealing with post 9/11 and all of the subsequent issues that were happening between the Middle East and the West. And so it was a lot of, I know of a brocade, silk brocade, person, one of the last ones that could do a hand loom and do those beautiful Damascene brocades. He was leaving for Belgium to try to get out of Syria because of the war. So I would imagine one of the great catastrophes, losses of this war is going to be the loss of the craftsmen, and those communities.
Let's see, we have some questions. Are there designs from different eras that are visible in the palace? And if so, how can we differentiate for the different eras?
Oh, that's a good question. I mentioned the Mamluk stonework design with using, instead of just using 2 colors for ablak, using 3. So we know that's a Mamluk influence that's coming through with relation to architecture. Also, the use of a lot of stucco embellishment is carrying over from the Mamluk period into this palace, probably because of the influence of Mamluk luxury buildings that were still standing in Damascus at the time. Okay. You can probably, Lisa, speak more to the geometry. I'm really interested in if there's any connection between the Sufi groups that existed in Damascus at the time and some of the geometry that was put into the palace, because some of it's very different. And I hope that you get a chance to do more research on that. We didn't have much time to talk about ceramics within the palace. I mentioned that it was very popular for upper middle class brides to have trousseaux or by giving gifts of imported ceramics, particularly from China and Japan. So that was influencing also a lot of the style of the production of mosaic tile work and ceramic tile work in Damascus. It had its own ceramic production. So those are some of the things that we can look for. Damascus, you have to think of Damascus as always been, but particularly this time was very eclectic, because you had lots of people gathering here for the last jump of the Hajj down to Mecca. And they would come to Damascus from all over the Muslim world. And so they brought with them textiles and jewelry to trade, to barter for food and housing and supplies and that sort of thing. And so jewelry production in Damascus, which has always been a metal, it was a Hellenistic and Roman foundry for weaponry. That's why we have the tradition of Damascene steel being developed eventually. But jewelry was always very eclectic because of these influences, particularly in the Islamic period, because of people coming in for the Hajj. So some of these things are hard to trace, but those are the major ones that I can think of to answer your question.
And a lot of the geometry has a very strong Mamluk flavor to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you can see designs that are both in Damascus and Cairo, for example.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I think I've got all of the questions that came through in the chat. So this one is from me. One thing that was turning up as we were trying to analyze some of those different roundel designs is that it's clear that there's been restoration at various points, and sometimes quite skilled and other times not at all.
Yeah.
Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about what the restoration efforts have been and how much we can kind of trust some of the patterns that we're seeing on the walls?
Oh, that's a great question. And I always, when I talk to my archaeology students doing research on particular buildings, say, make sure you go to the records first, because you're going to run into trouble when you think something is original and it's not. So the sad story about the Azem Palace is that, you know, in the late 1940s, the huge battles that occurred with Syrian independence forces trying to throw off the French mandate. And as part of that conflict, the French bombarded this area of the city, and parts of the Azem Palace were hit. It mostly hit the baths, and it also hit part of the Salamlik building, the Ka'a, where the pasha would greet and meet his political and business people. And so that had to be restored. And so that area of the palace is not original. Often, as you mentioned, you can see juxtaposed against each other are the original quality, high quality of the crafts versus what happened with the restoration. The rest of the palace is pretty much intact. There have been some repairs and a few restorations done. It's going to be, like I said, a real challenge going forward because we're losing those craftsmen that can do high quality work. It was opened as a museum in 1954. The palace passed back and forth between the original Azem family to the French, and then from the French back to the Azem family again, and then eventually the Syrian government, when it was established, purchased the palace itself and turned it eventually into the Folklife Museum that is there today. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, it does. Yeah. Oh, okay, we've got a couple of questions. Let's see. Could we say that Asad Pasha created a design of its own for the palace? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Did he design the palace, or like is this?
You know, we don't have a lot of information about how much of the design was from him or architects that he was working with. So that's a question that I don't think we have all the information that we need. It's very typical. It's just a grandized version. I came so close to buying a house in the old quarter in Damascus. You went on the tour with us when we were there of the beautiful Ottoman era and a little bit later era courtyard houses in the old city. They're absolutely gorgeous. And so the design is basically just an aggrandized version of those types of houses that the upper class could afford, with the central gardens and fountains. I think what's really fun to think about is the whole genre of Islamic architecture that tries to hit on all the human senses at the same time for both spiritual and physical reasons. But imagine having a bedroom suite in one of the places like the Azem Palace, where you had not only a reception room, all this spaced out into the gardens. So in the summertime, you have a reception room, you have a bedroom, you have 2 stories above you for the winter residency because it's warmer, and there's an Ottoman fireplace in the second story. But imagine waking up in the morning in the spring or summer. You're hearing the birds in the garden. You're smelling jasmine. You wake up, you look at the ceilings with the jami on them. All of the walls are decorated. The cupboards are decorated. Sometimes they have calligraphy with poems that are written about the building. And oftentimes they have favorite chapters or surah verses from different surahs in the Quran. So, and you're also hearing the flowing water that's outside, or the flowing water from the fountain in your bedroom complex. What a way to live. I mean, this is really incredible. And I think we forget, I mean, some of it's being now incorporated in Western architecture, and particularly in hospitals, because of the Islamic tradition of hospitals and healing. But we forget how much we're losing in our architecture of the senses, of the human senses, that calm you or stimulate you or create a spiritual atmosphere for you. And it's something that we really need to think about recapturing.
Yeah, we have a comment that is connecting the geometry and the idea of the forms with the paradise and the architecture and the gardens to create that sense of beauty. And I think that's that kind of a whole integrated multi-sensorial thing is very much a part of that experience.
And it continues when you step outside, because Damascus, I would love to have a hotel where I could just have cultural activities as part of the hotel experience from this time period, because you had shadow puppetry in the streets that was making fun of the government or entertaining children. You had, while we were still there were still madrasas or schools, Islamic schools, where you learn the Quran by singing it, okay? And so there would be competitions in the street between different schools singing surahs from the Quran and being awarded different prizes. You had street sellers in the streets singing chants to sell their wares. Like there was one from the knife seller who would say, come buy my knives. They're very sharp to cut your mother-in-law. So it's the whole mother-in-law syndrome. I mean, just amazing. Besides, we were just around the corner from the Azem Palace. You're around the corner from the spice market. So the scents that are in the air and the bakeries. And so there's so many sensory things going on, particularly in this time period, but still in Damascus in the modern age.
Okay, a whole bunch of questions came flooding in all at once. Okay, so let's see. We had a few people who have visited the palace, one back in 1989, and who remembers all of the mannequins.
Yeah.
So
there's a story about the mannequins. We were trying to get new mannequins produced as we left. This was one of the projects that didn't get finished. And so the Mesa, the director, sent out for an artist to come in, and skin color is still very important in Syria. And contrary to what Muhammad taught about equality, the lighter skin you have, the better, particularly for a bride. And so we were having real arguments about skin color for the mannequins. Some people didn't like that it was darker. And some people, we had one model that came in from an artist that was pink, and they didn't want to look like Scotsman. So it was a real debate just on the skin color about, what the mannequins should be. And they needed to be replaced because they were older, and some of the materials that were used in them were not conservation quality with the textile costumes that were on them. So yeah, I wish that's one project we could have finished and got that resolved.
Yeah, there's so many different things to consider in presenting a museum.
Yes.
So another museum question is that you mentioned interactive ideas for kids visiting the Palace Museum. What about adults? Is there any sort of?
Well, we produced, I said, we had two catalogs, one for the kids, and the other one basically replicated the exhibition panels with the Arabic translation. Okay. And we hired one of our young professionals who was really good at Arabic translation. So we had comments that it was one of the best translated exhibition panel groups that they'd had done in Damascus. There was no format for, say, museum educators like we have here in the States and in Britain. Right before we left, Bashar al-Assad's wife was involved in, for the first time, trying to start a children's museum just across from the National Museum. And I don't think that's progressed since the war started, because all resources are going for the war. So, like I said, we tried to integrate in the children's catalog things that adults could do with family members. And that was about as far as we could get at that point, okay, to try to integrate more meaningful experiences within the museum itself. I wish we could have stayed and done more.
I remember when I was there with you, they were installing those big museum panels for the first time, giving the text context for what visitors were seeing and how well that was being received by members of the public who could come and get the historical context for this building that had just been so familiar. Yeah,
I think interesting. We did have some kickback, and it's interesting where that came from. It was from the guides, the just street guides that would get hired, particularly by tourists, to come into the palace. And they were upset because they felt that their job had been taken away from them, because now the tourists didn't have to have guides. If they spoke English, they could read, what was going on. So you never know where the critique is going to come from, for these kinds of things. So.
Okay, let's see. I think I have two last questions. Was there a heating system that's built into the?
They're depending on the rooms. Okay, the courtyard served a couple of purposes in each of the major areas. It's a heat sump. It's a style, interesting, that goes all the way back to Minoan Crete and then in Egypt. It's passed on from Egypt to Greece to Rome to Islamic Mediterranean architecture. So in the winter, the paving would collect solar heat. And in the wintertime, upstairs, each room would have, it's an interesting Ottoman style little fireplace, so that there were chimneys that went up through the ceiling. That was, and except for the hammam, that's about all the heating that you got for the winter time. In the hammam, however, the movie showed you that there was a boiler system. It comes from the Roman bath system that would heat the bath and heat the water in the bath itself. But that's about it. And in the summer, the courtyards then with the flowing water and the awans would catch the breeze, and the greenery would keep the buildings pretty cool. And they have very, very thick walls. So that helped also with climate control. But you just dressed up. We did when we lived in the old city. If you, you were with us in the wintertime, were you?
I wore a lot of coats when I was there.
Yeah, pipes would start to break all over the old city, and there wasn't any heat per se, and people were using very dangerous little kerosene heaters that would sometimes explode. It was not a good. You just put on more clothes, okay?
Okay, this is kind of a follow-up question,
Okay.
which is are you able to explain to the function? The function of the fountain that's in the Azem Palace and any of the water works. Is there? How is it connected to the waterworks in the city?
They're pulling water off. The Barda River is very, very close, okay, which comes down. It's a freshwater river that comes down from springs in the mountains between Syria and Lebanon. In fact, we used to go up there in the summer. Everybody would go up. They had a car and collect water for drinking from these springs. There were lots of vacation condos that were up there until the war started. And as you drove up, you could stop at little cafes on the river itself. That water's being pulled in to the palace itself because it's so close. And I mentioned to you, Lisa, that one of the problems of the palace is the lower underground levels that are storage areas, they're so close to the Barda River that the water table causes water problems that are affecting the foundations in the palace. So that's one of its challenges. Today, the water's being pumped by gasoline and electrical pumps, depending on where you are. Previously, before you had those kinds of things, they were using the same kind of pumping systems that the ancient Romans used, siphons and all kinds of other things that they were using. So again, very inexpensively creating beautiful environments with the use of water.
I think I misunderstood a question that came earlier about there's a question relating to an Azem Palace in the city of Hama.
Yes.
Can you speak to any relationship between those?
Yes, the Hama Palace, we visited a couple times. There were, at the same time that Asad al-Pasha, one of his relatives was also made district director in a couple of the other cities too, Homs and Hama. And so it's a smaller palace. It isn't as luxurious, but it also has a folklife cultural collection up there. Hama is really interesting because it still has the big noria, the big wooden water wheels on the river that brought water up. They squeak because of the water affecting the wood. And that system often would feed luxury homes in the old city like the palace there. So it's a great place to go and wonderful. Before the war, there were still in the old city people producing handloom cotton. Those big cotton towels that you'd wrap yourself in the bath are being produced. I haven't checked on them recently, so I don't know what the status is, but a great place to go.
All right. Two final questions, and then we'll call it an evening.
That's fine. I'm really fun to answer these questions.
Yes, and we'd be very happy to pass on any questions that you may send into the school via email. We'll pass them on to Dr. Finlayson. So I got a number of questions about the poetry, but we'll say that for the last. Let's see, we've got, in your opinion, from an archaeological perspective, would you say using the palace now as a venue for occasions such as weddings and parties would negatively affect the preservation of the palace?
Oh, that's a good question. It's always a trade-off, particularly when you're dealing with a museum that is not funded the way we fund museums here in the United States. Okay. I always tell my students to follow the money, and that determines a lot what you can do or can't do with conservation or events. Syria, as a Ba'athist socialist regime, the museum only receives whatever the central government allows it to receive. In other words, there's no incentive to improve or change or do anything with exhibitions to bring paying customers in, because that money doesn't go directly to the museum. It goes to the central government. Okay. And that creates financial challenges for the museum. So you have to decide, okay, are you going to, can you find ways to entice the government to give you a little bit more financial support to keep the museum going, keep the building conserved as best you can, and decide whether what's the trade-off for that as far as conservation. The big events that were held at the Azem Palace when we were working there, there was a wonderful Sufi group that came in for an evening performance. Both the choir group and the whirling dervishes came in that evening. Most of the events are held in the courtyard, and we had them remove, there was an old wooden stage they used to use that was harming the courtyard. We had that removed. And so it probably wasn't as damaging as it potentially could be. Not a lot of events are allowed within the museum rooms, which is a good thing. It's mostly the open courtyards, so it's minimalizing, whatever potential damage could happen. And they're pretty well guarded, and as far as use or misbehavior, people coming in, people are usually pretty well behaved coming in to use these types of things. The one challenge is restrooms, because this is an Ottoman era building. It doesn't have the types of plumbing that we're used to. And so that was the biggest concern, is providing public restrooms for these types of events.
Finally, we have a number of people are intrigued about the poetry that you mentioned. Is there any place to learn more about the poetry? Do you know what's where the poems come from?
I seem to remember that there is a compilation in Arabic of some of the poetry. Let me check on that, because we had a colleague, Hashim Al-Tawil, who's an expert in that sort of thing. We had him come to the palace and do an assessment of that. Let me contact him, and I'll try to find out and let you know if he's put that together.
Lovely.
It's been a while, so.
Well, marvelous. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. And I think if questions could continue coming in, we'd be happy to get you answers over email as well.
Well, I'm excited to see if there's some members of the Azem family that attended. So that's really exciting.
That we have certainly had several members of the family I've seen have been, and we passed on several other questions as well. So welcome. And we are going to have a little bonus session, kind of a follow-on from this on Monday. Rasha, do you have this slide handy? So, everyone who has registered for this class is invited to attend the this session on Monday, which will take place at 4 p.m. UK time. And we are going to do one of the patterns from the Azem Palace in an hour. So we'll draw that using compasses and rulers, and you'll have a little taste of some of this geometric pattern, and maybe gather more questions to pass on to Cindy. So we'd love to have you there.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been really fun.
Okay, so it's been an absolute pleasure, yeah, thank you so much, and we hope to see the rest of you online in other classes, lectures, and do support the traditional arts by making them or buying them. So it's really important. So thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Lisa. Travel safe this next week.
I will.